Hello everyone, I'm Dianne Trussell and I'm about to commence a PhD in cognitive neuroscience at the University of New England in Australia. And today I want to present to you the results of a pilot study which I started to do ahead of the PhD, and the thing that I'm interested in is having a look at whole body consciousness. So comparing the physiology and psychology of meditation and yoga. And so this is a pilot study. So the aims of this study were to develop an experimental model before commencing the PhD project. And what I felt to do was to compare whole body focused meditation, two of them. Initially there were three, but one of them didn't work because of an exercise component. So the two that I went on with are a breath and body meditation and a sitting yoga. And one of the questions was, are there any effects that are different in those two from baseline? And is there any relationship to psychological scales? Is it possible to use an iPhone app for doing the physiological recording? And is it possible to conduct experimental sessions with participants online using Skype or Zoom? And would there be any insights to be gained from a random event generator running at the same time as the experiments to see if there are non-local effects? So my question is, if mind is considered to be consciousness, which is quite predominant, what about the whole body? What about the whole body as a conscious being? So although this pilot study doesn't address this fully, it's the beginning of that research. And there's an increasing emphasis today in research and in people's practice on mind-brain control of body, such as mindfulness meditation and the other mental meditations. But all cells communicate, body and brain, no difference, they all communicate. So are we possibly missing out on the contribution to consciousness that the whole body makes? And is in fact consciousness a whole body phenomenon? So the main measure that I used was heart rate variability, which can be measured through the iPhone app. And that has been shown by a lot of researchers to be correlated with physiological and psychological well-being. There's a lot of research still ongoing and a lot of unanswered questions in that. But what's relevant to what I was doing in this study is something that Schaffer and Ginsberg quoted. HRV indexes neurocardiac function and is generated by heart-brain interactions and dynamic nonlinear autonomic nervous system processes. So there's a strong indication in there that when we're talking about HRV, it's very much a phenomenon throughout the whole body. And yet HRV interacts with psychology. So there's a potential, direction in the research of what I'm talking about. So what can be learned by body-focused meditation and non-postural yoga? That is yoga where you're not using your mind to put your body into a whole variety of different poses. And are non-local conscious effects measurable? The methods in this pilot study were a little different from the usual kind of participant in laboratory work. To begin with, the recordings were done in people's own homes and not the laboratory, although very quickly COVID occurred and the face-to-face was no longer possible. And so the experiment was continued online via Skype or Zoom. There were 6 adult participants, none of whom drank alcohol or coffee or used nicotine or any drugs. And they filled out 2 psychological questionnaires before and after the study, one of them being the psychological well-being scale of Carol Riff, and the other being the beliefs about consciousness and reality of Emance Barash and Robert Moore. The sessions, as I said, were conducted over Skype, although some were on Zoom. And in each case, there were 3 10-minute sessions of baseline and of meditation and of yoga. And the app which was used is called Welltory. It's an HRV recording app. And those recordings were made before and after each session. You can see here what the Welltory app screen looks like. This is the first results screen, where you have parameters such as productivity, autonomic nervous system balance, you have resilience, you have a panel for things like stress and various aspects of energy. This is another one of the screens which has got the frequency domains of the HRV recording. There are many measurements that can be derived from this app. So in addition, while the sessions were running, both before and after, but also during each session, there was a 10-minute session of a random event generator, the field reg made by Celeron. It's a small portable reg. And they were made before, during and after each session. And there's an example of one of the output charts. So analysis was done using paired t-tests and correlations on SPSS. So looking at the physiological results, and bear in mind that it's very preliminary, most of the analysis has yet to be done. So the means of many of the frequency domain parameters, and that's like total power, the high frequency waves from the heart, the low frequency waves, and the very low frequency waves, increase between the before and after conditions, but all of the conditions, including the baseline. So what that tells me is that there's an effect of the experimental situation itself going on. So for example, in the baseline condition, there was an increase of 132 to 180% in those parameters. In the yoga condition, 130 to 149% increase. And in meditation, a much bigger increase, 187 to 221, which turned out to be significant. Stress measurements also appeared to decrease in all conditions, though the statistics on that remain to be done. The meditation in doing t-tests was significantly increased the VLF component of HRV. So the very low frequency waves increased significantly with a P of 0.002 in the after meditation condition compared to before. There was also a trend of the low frequency waves increasing, although the P was 0.86 for that, not quite significant. Might be different if there was a much bigger study done. Interestingly, the yoga did not significantly increase the frequency parameters or the stress, and it was about the same as the baseline. So what was very interesting is that when the HRV variables were correlated with the psychological well-being, there was a systematic correlation across many of the HRV variables, and this was quite an interesting result. So here's the result of the high frequency waves of the HRV from all 6 participants. And you can see in the pale bars are the before conditions, the darker bars are the after conditions. And here we have blue for baseline, magenta for meditation, and yellow for yoga. And you can see that there's been an increase after each condition. And here is the low frequency for all 6 participants. And once again, there's an increase from baseline to after the condition. And we had a P of 0.086 for the meditation, the before to after meditation. So that's a trend towards significance. More testing needs to be done on that, but that was an interesting indicator. And here we have the mean VLF of all 6 participants. And once again, there's an increase from before to after. But now we see a much greater increase in the meditation after with a P of 0.002. So the meditation was obviously having quite a big effect on the very low frequency waves generated by the heart. And this is showing the relationship between psychological well-being and the very low frequencies. There was a strong positive correlation, 0.819, with a significance of 0.046. So that was a very significant, strong correlation between psychological well-being and very low frequencies. Just a bit about the psychological results. On the psychological well-being scale, all the participants scored high on well-being. Now, as just mentioned, the psychological well-being correlated highly and significantly with the baseline very low frequencies. It also correlated highly with the after meditation very low frequencies, and it was negatively correlated with the heart rate, significantly negatively correlated with heart rate. On the beliefs about consciousness and reality scale, all the participants scored high for transcendent beliefs and views of reality. So they tended to have non-materialist views. They had extraordinary beliefs that as a result of having experiences that they feel science can't explain. They all think that inner growth is very important. They have a mental monism view of reality, and they have their own religious views. There were some interesting results with the random event generator, although the analysis is yet to be done. There were visibly responses to known psychological states. So, for example, if we look at this trace, the blue line above and below represent the p equals 0.05 lines of significance. The center line is the baseline of random. And this particular trace is where the participant is meditating and the researcher, i.e. me, is doing the utmost to maintain a meditative state throughout the experiment to avoid influencing what's going on. And then in this situation, the participant was starting to look at their well-Tory results, which were quite low, and became very concerned. And the reg trace went right down into significance. Z equals minus 2.72, which is approximately p equals 0.01. And here's the opposite, where they were excited about having really good well-Tory results and shot right up over the 0.05 line to Z of 2.18, which is around about p of 0.02. So here you can see some other effects where, although the participant was meditating, the researcher, i.e. myself, started to worry about something, and the trace went down, not into negative significance, but as a notable downward shift. In this situation up here, the participant and the researcher were fairly still, and then there was a sudden distraction that came in at the participant's end, and the reg trace shot up. And here's another situation where the participant was actually in a state of self-doubt and concerned about something, and then we shifted into an exciting conversation and the reg trace shot up. So it looks as if the reg may be able to be used in conjunction with other kinds of experiments as a kind of a moment-by-moment check on what's occurring in consciousness. So there were body focus effect trends on the frequency domains, but it needs a bigger study, longer recordings, more participants for long time series, because there is high inter-individual variability. There's a general increase in HRV measures, and in particular the wide correlation of psychological well-being with HRV measures. Now that's consistent with a lot of other research that's been done, although the research is in quite a disorganized state, I should say, and there's a lot of disagreement about what kinds of measures are, what kind of measures come from what kind of phenomena in the body, what kind of physiology. So the consensus is that the higher HRV, the higher the physical health and psychological well-being, and they're mutually interactive. So the VLF significantly increased in this study, and that's consistent with physical and psychological benefits of meditation. So for example, Schaffer and Ginsberg related that very low frequency correlates to unhealthy states such as arrhythmic death, inflammation, and deficiency in hormones, particularly testosterone. So having an increased VLF with meditation, for example, is a sign that there's an increase in the benefits to health. I noticed there was a bit of a paradox in that the LF increase, which happens in a lot of other studies, and meditation's known to produce relaxation and well-being, but there's also a lot of stories in the research that a high LF is a sign of increased sympathetic nervous system mediated stress responses. So if meditation is beneficial and the LF is increasing, that is a bit of a paradox, that LF could be a sign of a stress response. And Schaffer and Ginsberg did say that when there's a slow respiration going on, deep, slow breathing, like a lot of people might be doing in meditation, that can raise the LF without it actually being a stress response. So there's a lot of work to do in the entire field of HIV and well-being, and that's commented on by Pons. These findings also underscore the need to critically assess traditional frequency domain heart rate variability parameters in making inferences about autonomic alterations during meditation with slow breathing. And Hunt and Sangsawan said this delineation of the different compartments of autonomic nervous system activity and the supposed correspondence with HRV power in the different frequency bands has recently been challenged. It now seems that HRV is the result of more complex sympathetic-parasympathetic interactions that are not yet fully understood. So in conclusion, in this pilot study, I had a small sample size, short recordings, and yet there were some surprisingly high correlations and some trends that were revealed. The psychological well-being correlated with many HRV measures, which is consistent with psychological and physical well-being being correlated. Meditation showed the biggest impact on HRV, an LF increasing trend, and the VLF significantly increased. Yoga HRV was comparable with baseline. So all in all, there were interesting insights, including from the reg, and the experimental model is worth pursuing. So the Welltory Heart app worked well for the physiological recording, and the participants loved it too. They had their phones with them, and a lot of them got right into it and started to understand their physiology more. Most of them commented that they loved being part of the study, and it had increased their awareness of what's going on in their own bodies and their need to be much more present with what they're doing. The online video sessions worked fantastically, and in fact 4 of the participants were on the other side of the planet, and we had the Welltory, the reg, and all the communications working as harmoniously as if everybody and everything was in the same room. So it's really great to be able to do experiments that way. So here are some of the references which were referred to in this work directly. And I would like to thank all my study participants who gave their time freely and willingly, and also provided a lot of interesting insights. Dr. Graham Jamieson for assistance with statistics, Professor Emance Barash for help in the early days with reg and getting sorted out in this field, Herb Mertz for the Celeron reg and his assistance with that and his great book on the use of it, the Apple Numbers discussion group, who were I'm very grateful to for helping me go through my learning curve with the numbers program, and the University of New England in Australia, who helped out with a laptop and their license for SPSS. So thank you very much, everyone.
Hi, my name is Dr. Tracy Brandmeyer. I'm a scientist at the University of California, San Francisco. And today I'm going to be talking about my research project titled Closed Loop Frontal Midline Theta Neurofeedback, a novel approach for training focused attention meditation. And this project was done alongside my thesis supervisor, Dr. Arnaud Delorme, who is a scientist at UC San Diego, as well as the Centre National de Recherche Scientifique in France. This work was inspired by previous research that we conducted on the effects of mind wandering and how meditation influences the wandering mind. And mind wandering is something that we all do, that we're all very familiar with, and is very important for memory consolidation and creativity. And it helps us make use of boring environments, and we can plan and reflect and predict into the future. And it's absolutely critical and uniquely human. However, when mind wandering becomes excessive and compulsive, you see that there is a decreased sense of well-being in individuals who report very high degrees of mind wandering and rumination. And we have a fairly good understanding of mind wandering and what's happening in the brain during mind wandering. However, it's not as simple as there being one network in the brain that's solely responsible for mind wandering. However, the default mode network, which you see here, is significantly implicated in the neuronal processes underlying self-generated thought. And basically, when we mind wander, we either think about ourselves, we think about other people, we reflect on the past, we predict out into the future. And when we do these things, the default mode network lights up. And while this has become a very popular field of study over the last 10 years, the idea of mind wandering and the impact of mind wandering on well-being is something that's been discussed in the ancient contemplative practices for thousands of years. And meditation lineages and contemplative practices referred to the wandering mind as the monkey mind. And the monkey mind is this idea of the mind grasping and craving, and that through meditative practices and contemplative practices, we can quell the monkey mind and train stability and attentional clarity that allows us to transcend this kind of incessant, ongoing dialogue. And during meditation, you essentially are training this ability to become aware of when the mind wanders. So we place the focus of our attention on an object such as the breath, or a mantra, or the physical sensations of the body, and then we focus for a period of time, and then our mind inevitably wanders. We become aware that the mind has wandered, and we bring our attention back to the object of focus. And this is fundamentally the cycle of meditation. And it's, I would say, like the foundation of many meditative practices is this just basic training of attentional focus. And then, of course, there are many other additional features to meditative practices and styles of meditative practice, and loving kindness and mindfulness, and many different directions that you can go with meditation. However, the element of focused meditation is arguably like a central core feature of most meditative practices. And we were very interested in studying the effects of long-term meditation practice on people's ability to report if they were mind wandering. So if they're training in this cycle to become aware of when they're mind wandering, are they better at reporting it? So does experience influence the frequency of mind wandering? So not only does it allow us to get a better idea of when it's happening, because meditation practitioners are experts and better at telling us when it's happening, but does it actually influence the frequency with which this occurs? And we wanted to know, do experts actually report that they're not mind wandering? And then do we see that reflected in the brain data? And are there differences between people who are really highly expert versus people who are novices? And this was a study that we did back in 2018. And here you can simply see the paradigm. We had participants sit and engage in a meditative practice, and then we would probe them every 30 to 90 seconds and ask them, like, are you meditating? Are you mind wandering? How tired are you? And then we would look at the period of time just before we probed them to see what their brain activity looked like and how well it corresponded with the responses that they gave to the questions in our probe. And what we found was that, well, one, we found absolutely no difference in novice practitioners. We found that novices were not giving us any consistent reports that corresponded with the data that we were looking at. However, in our experienced practitioners, we saw that when they reported being heavily engaged in their meditative practice, we saw this strong burst in what's called frontal theta activity, and which was not present when they said that they were mind wandering. And this is the difference of activity between when they were meditating and when they were mind wandering. This is a group average. And then here you see when you focus in on exactly what is the neural component through a method called independent component analysis, you can see here a little bit more specific spatial topography where that activity is coming from. So we were interested in closing this causal loop. Rather than just seeing enhanced theta activity during periods of meditation, we wanted to say, can we close the causal loop and reverse engineer this? Theta is thought to serve as this underlying language of the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex actually, like, kind of this phenomena called rhythmogenesis, which is that the cellular structure of the prefrontal cortex actually kind of almost defaults into this theta band and supports theta oscillations. And theta oscillations, we know, are functioning at long-range communication and the sequencing of neural activity. And so we were wondering, if we train this frontal theta, rather than seeing improvements in behavior and associating with just the theta, can we train the theta and see improvements in the behavior? And one of the things that we don't have with meditation is feedback. And we know that feedback plays a very critical role in learning, with recent clinical trials showing that neurofeedback is incredibly effective at training attention deficit and stroke. So feedback is absolutely critical. And that's the one thing that you don't really have when you're meditating, is you don't have any direct feedback. So we were wondering if we could do a neurofeedback study. Neurofeedback is simply a psychophysiological approach or procedure in which online feedback, whether it's visual or auditory or haptic, is provided and represents neural activity that allows for the purposes of the regulation of brain activity. And this is a recent study, 2016, not so recent anymore, but this was the most recent comprehensive study or review that was done on the state of the art of neurofeedback. And as a scientist who studies meditation, the fact that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC here, is one of the regions that is very specifically responsive and targeted during various neurofeedback protocols is very interesting, because that's also one of the key regions that is targeted and trained during meditation practice. And you see in expert meditation practitioners, the DLPFC is generally targeted, and you see increased cortical thickness in this particular structure. Also, the anterior cingulate cortex here is also heavily implicated, not only in meditative practices and the regulation of the emotional salience network, but is also heavily implicated in the regulation of attention. So is it possible to upregulate frontal theta by training novices who have no experience with meditation over a period of 8 days? So we gave subjects basic instructions in a focused meditation practice, which simply involved focus your attention on your breath, on the movements of your belly, and then had them engage in a neurofeedback task where they focused their attention on a screen and tried to use that visual feedback, which I'll show you in the next slide, to increase this production of frontal midline theta. And what we would like to see is differences in behavior. So we saw improved behavior in the experienced practitioners, or we saw increased reported meditation and then increased frontal theta. Can we reverse that? And will we see increased behavioral improvement after we train this frontal theta? And can we do that with meditation-inspired techniques? No one has really tried to pair traditional neurofeedback, where you upregulate a specific targeted frequency using a specific strategy. Generally, in neurofeedback, people are given a list of strategies to choose from, whereas here we're providing a very specific set of instructions to use meditation-inspired techniques to regulate the neurofeedback. And will we see differences in tasks that measure cognitive control that we know are involving this frontal theta, the structures that are involved in producing frontal theta? So we developed a training protocol over 8 sessions. Each session was 30 minutes. And within each session, we had 6 blocks that were 5 minutes each. And then when we did a brief baseline measurement before and after. We did this in 24 subjects, 12 females, 12 males, and we had matched, every participant was matched for age and gender. And then one group, our online neurofeedback group, got real feedback, and one group got sham feedback or fake feedback from their matched pair. And we also were very diligent in timing it so that the participants came in exactly 24 hours later, and tried to keep everything as structured as possible because, as I'll discuss later, differences in time of day and differences in duration between recording sessions can impact how the brain consolidates this information and learning. So here is a overview of the experimental setup, or a video showing our participant doing the experiment. His EEG is being recorded in real time. It's being analyzed in real time, and then the results of that analysis are being fed back and are what are responsible for the fluctuations in the color of the blue box. So as his frontal theta increases, this blue box gets lighter. As his frontal theta decreases, it gets darker. And this increase or decrease is based on the baseline measurement. So if it increases above the baseline, it'll turn light blue. If it decreases below the baseline, it'll turn black. And then as the subject gets better, it's an adaptive protocol, so it gets harder and harder. And as they get worse, it gets easier and easier. So the protocol adapts with the participant as they are engaged in this experiment, so as to prevent ceiling and floor effects. And this is just an overview of the closed loop nature of the experiment. We record their data, we reconstruct it, essentially removing the artifacts and the muscle movements and the eye blinks, which can significantly contaminate real-time EEG analysis of brain data. We extract this frontal theta that we're interested in looking at. We use that frontal theta to feed into the interface, which then controls the color of the box. And then the subject receives that feedback within 300 milliseconds. And all of the subjects reported there being, all of the subjects who received feedback reported there being a direct correspondence between when they received the when their brain was doing something and when the visual stimulus reflected. So as they could tell they were becoming more focused, the box would turn lighter blue, and there was a correspondence between these two. And this just shows you how we reconstruct the data, or just a visual example of what happens when we reconstruct the data. So here you can see in the yellow, these are eye blinks and muscle, and you could imagine that this would significantly impact the quality and the integrity of the data. So in order to have a high fidelity signal, we reconstruct these artifacts based on a previous session where we have them blink and make movements, so we know what those types of how those types of actions impact their EEG, and then we can reconstruct the data in real time. And this is absolutely critical for doing any kind of sophisticated real-time neurofeedback. So our results show that our participants who actually received neurofeedback were significantly improving and increasing their ability to generate this theta feedback across the 8 sessions. And our neurofeedback, our sham neurofeedback group in blue was not. And furthermore, in neurofeedback, we know that there are what we call non-responders. So roughly 25 to 30% of people who undergo neurofeedback are non-responsive. And this is due to a host of reasons, but the most common is actually the way the brain is folded. It can impact the way that different types of neural features project to the surface and can be detected and measured and recorded at the surface. And so when you're dealing with something that's measured in a very specific spatial location, and we're recording and feeding back based on something that's very spatially specific, when that person's theta may not project here, but may project here or here, they won't necessarily respond to the feedback. So when we remove participants whose data was 3 deviations from the mean or more, we see a much more significant effect on our training success. We also saw significant differences in other frequency bands, which is another common finding in neurofeedback research. You see that when you train a specific frequency like theta or alpha, it doesn't actually just target those frequencies, but it targets many other frequencies, which are all kind of coordinated or functioning in an orchestral-like fashion. And so if you upregulate alpha or you upregulate theta, you'll also see a whole broad band effect. And that's exactly what we found. We saw that we had significant differences in lower theta all the way up through upper beta in our group, all significant after the neurofeedback, after the 8 sessions of neurofeedback. And we saw no significant differences in our sham group. We also gave our participants a working memory task, a behavioral task that measures working memory as well as sustained attention. So it gets progressively more difficult from the 1 back to the 3 back. Here in the 1 back, you can see the subjects have to remember the letter that was presented just 1 screen back. In the 2 back, you have to remember the letter that was presented 2 screens back. And in the 3 back, you have to remember if this is the letter that was presented 3 screens back. So it gets progressively harder, but they all conditions require sustained attention as well as working memory and cognitive regulation. And what we found was our neurofeedback group had significantly faster reaction times on correct trials as compared to our sham group, who actually had slower reactions on correct trials, which is a little interesting given that you would expect a training effect that both groups would get faster. However, our neurofeedback group was significantly faster on the correct trials after feedback than before training. So our study demonstrated that we were in fact able to effectively enhance this frontal theta over 8 sessions using meditation-inspired techniques. And we also observed significant behavioral differences. So we did effectively kind of reverse engineer the findings in our previous study and say, okay, if we do upregulate theta, yes, we see improvements in cognitive regulation and the regulation of attention. And what's interesting about the non-responders is that this is something that's been seen now in many different studies and something that really needs to potentially be addressed earlier on. You need to have MRIs or multimodal studies in order to enhance your signal detection, but it may explain why there is a lot of there's not like a clear literature on the effects of neurofeedback and why some people are responsive to feedback and some people aren't. The nonlinear nature of learning and plasticity is also something that factors in. So we did see effects after 8 days, but sometimes learning and these kinds of things can oscillate over longer periods of time, and consolidation of training can take weeks and months. And so these types of factors have not always been historically incorporated into neurofeedback studies and are something that should be reflected upon as this field moves forward, because they may play a significant role in how we study the effects of these types of trainings. And the idea of closing causal loops, so if we do have observations where we see correlations between certain types of behavior and certain types of brain activity, by closing these causal loops, by then measuring these types of activities and training them with neurofeedback and seeing if we see changes in behavior, is a very good way of approaching validating a lot of the findings that we have in cognitive science and behavioral science. Neurally inspired behavioral interventions, I believe, are truly going to be a huge part of the future and how we approach neuropsychiatric disorders by using these anatomically specific pharmacological interventions. We're flooding people's systems systemically, and it's not a very precise way of targeting and specifying behavioral interventions that will directly impact and improve people's quality of life. So by using behavioral interventions or interventions such as neurofeedback, where we can actually target specific structures in the brain, I believe that this will be much more integrated into various types of interventions moving forward, as long as we can develop methodologies for doing this effectively. So source localization and MRI and the sophistication, increasing the sophistication of our paradigms. And so I will say, yes, multimodal neurofeedback is absolutely the way we need to go. We need to combine EEG with MRI and even brain stimulation, and combine these modalities that we have in order to do targeted behavioral interventions that can really target structures in the brain that we know are maybe being compromised by a certain kind of condition or disorder. And we know that with neurofeedback, we can target big hubs and nodes, which can have impacts at the network level. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I will be taking questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Noah Latham from University of Calgary. Thanks for tuning in. My talk is going to be about mystical experience and epistemic justification. Mystical experiences have arisen across all cultures and historical eras, and they're widely recognized as having a transformative value for the people who experience them, and that's often regarded as a very positive thing. In this talk, I'll be looking at two types of mystical experience and asking whether they can provide epistemic justification for beliefs that arise from the content of the experience. I'll come to a negative conclusion, but argue at the end that this doesn't undermine their transformative value. So I'll take my understanding of mystical experience, the concept of the mystical experience, from William James. I'll take as necessary conditions that the experience seems revelatory and that it has a powerful phenomenological component. It seems greatly significant, and that it contains elements that seem impossible to describe linguistically. Other marks of the experience are that it appears blissful and appears to be epistemically authoritative. I'm going to classify mystical experiences in terms of phenomenological structure. So on the one kind, which I'll call richly structured experiences, have at least as much structure as ordinary waking consciousness. The ones with less structure, I'm going to call minimally structured, because all the experiences of that sort seem to have very little structure. And the extreme case is what's often referred to as a pure consciousness experience. Now, this distinction is is similar to the widely used classification that's made popular by Walter Stace in his book Mysticism and Philosophy from 1961. He described as introvertive experiences such as pure consciousness experiences, and extrovertive, by contrast, to be the experiences that are perceived through the ordinary senses, but experiences that he took to be of a unifying vision, that all things are one, where that one is consciousness, or subjectivity, or life. So his classification involved a component having to do with content. I prefer to stick purely to a phenomenological classification. So let's start then with the minimally structured mystical experiences. These, including the pure consciousness experiences, can occur spontaneously, but typically arise at the advanced stages of a long course of meditation, such as the last of the 8 jhana states outlined in the Buddhist Pali Canon. Pure consciousness experiences can't be introspected because they're by definition structureless, and introspection requires a higher order mental state, which requires a structure. However, they are often subsequently described not just as experiences of pure consciousness, but in more exalted terms. Several philosophers from the perennialist tradition, for example, Stace and Jonathan Shear, have argued that there's a consensus among reports of pure consciousness experiences across all historical periods and different traditions, and that this consensus shows them to be experiences of ultimate reality. And then they argue that this provides justification for believing that a unitary pure consciousness is the ultimate reality. Now, I think there are at least 3 problems with this. First, the reports of these experiences are based not simply on memory, since the experience itself doesn't have enough structure to be an awareness of a pure consciousness as ultimate reality. So the reports have to be based on subsequent interpretation of an apparent memory of a pure consciousness experience. Second problem is that the descriptions of these experiences vary enormously. So, for example, you get them described as experiences of God, the Godhead, nothingness, the void, an abstract self, many others. And there's no obvious consensus that nothingness and the void, for example, are interpreted as an ultimate reality. Thirdly, some of these reports, almost immediately or subsequently, go on to question the veracity of their initial interpretation of the experience. And this, I think, casts doubt on that initial interpretation as a source of truth. So it's dubious that these pure consciousness experiences or the minimally structured mystical experiences have a content at all. So I think this is not a promising basis for an argument that mystical experiences reveal any deeper reality beyond the existence of those mental states, the experiences themselves. So now on to the second type of mystical experience, the richly structured ones, which is going to be the focus for the rest of the talk. These have an interestingly different set of causes from the minimally structured ones. Both types can arise spontaneously for no apparent reason. And minimally structured experiences, as I suggested, arise principally during meditation and as an aim of the meditation. Richly structured experiences don't, although some meditation practices may be thought to increase the chances of having a spontaneous, richly structured mystical experience, but the experiences don't happen during the meditation. Now, an interesting difference. Richly structured mystical experiences arise sometimes during periods of extreme psychological or physiological stress, sometimes through deliberate austerities, and sometimes from ingesting a drug. As far as I've been able to discover, minimally structured mystical experiences aren't caused in these ways. Now, if any of you know of any evidence to the contrary, I'd be very interested to hear. There's also, of course, an extreme difference, intrinsic difference between these different types of experience. The richly structured mystical experiences have a rich synchronic structure that comes from the richness of the sensory fields, and they have a diachronic structure also that allows for introspection. The spontaneous experiences reported seem to offer relatively little in the way of diachronic structure, but the drug-induced experiences seem to have a rich narrative structure similar to dreams. In fact, they're well described as trips. Minimally structured mystical experiences, by contrast, as we saw, are completely static or very close to it. Richly structured mystical experiences have an intentional content, and this typically has experience of a unity or oneness, at least as a component. That experience can be reported as a union with this unity, maintaining that some kind of a distinctness from it as you get in theistic experiences, or it can be described as a merge or identity with the unity. The unity can be a mind, consciousness, or it can be a life, or it can be a unity of all things that's not necessarily mental or vital. Now I'm going to have a look at some reports that appear to be of richly structured mystical experiences. So these are on a handout, which I hope will be available to you. And I'm going to begin with 2 reports of experiences that I've chosen precisely because they don't have a unity as content. So the first one is from Genevieve Foster in 1985. She writes, A few feet in front of me, and a little to the left, stood a numinous figure, and between us was an interchange, a flood, flowing both ways of love. Margaret Prescott Montague, in 1916, describes an experience which is discussed by Stace, who explicitly excludes it as merely a borderline extroverted experience because it lacks unity as content. She writes, "Entirely unexpectedly, for I had never dreamed of such a thing, my eyes were opened, and for the first time in my life, I caught a glimpse of the ecstatic beauty of reality, its unspeakable joy, beauty, and importance. I saw no new thing, but I saw all the usual things in a miraculous new light, in what I believe is their true light. I saw how wildly beautiful and joyous, beyond any words of mine to describe, is the whole of life. Every human being moving across that porch, every sparrow that flew, every branch tossing in the wind, was caught in and part of the whole mad ecstasy of loveliness, of joy, of importance, of intoxication of life. I saw the actual loveliness which was always there." Now, there's some examples I won't read. Arthur Koestler and Irina Starr describe a unity that appears to be a universal mind, or perhaps just universal consciousness. The one from Jane Goodall describes a unity that's perhaps best regarded as life. But I do want to read an example that characterizes the unity in the broadest possible way as a unity of all things. And it's from the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, from an experience he had on board the Apollo 14 mission. "I saw the Earth, the Sun, the Moon, and a 360-degree panorama of the heavens. The magnificence of all of this was the trigger in my visioning. In the ancient Sanskrit, it's called samadhi. It means that you see things with your senses the way they are. You experience them viscerally and internally as a unity and as a oneness accompanied by ecstasy. All matter in our universe is created in star systems, and so the matter in my body, the matter in the spacecraft, the matter in my partner's bodies was the product of stars. We are stardust, and we're all one in that sense." Having described an ecstatic feeling of unity, Mitchell goes on to characterize a physical connectedness using his scientific knowledge. So this suggests that the unity he felt aware of wasn't a vital or mental unity, but something broader. The idea that there's a unity of all things is quite uncontroversial and would be accepted by physicalists. So the experience of Mitchell is not remarkable for the content itself. What's interesting about it is that the content appears as a phenomenologically powerful, non-intellectual vision. So now to inferences from these richly structured mystical experiences. Do they justify belief in their content, as the experiences typically assume? An obvious problem with this is that most of the contents of these experiences are contradicted by contents of other people's experiences. Some experience union with a fundamentally personal God. Others experience a fundamentally impersonal unity. Some experience God as all-loving. Others experience God as hating certain people. And this is enough to show that mystical experiences are not a reliable provider of first-person epistemic justification of their contents. An individual is not justified in believing in the content of her experience merely because she has the experience. A more plausible idea, adopted by many, is that there can be third-person epistemic justification for belief in the content of mystical experiences, provided that it's a content that's common to all mystical experiences. So what might that core content be? James proposes the existence of a wider self that's helpful. But I think it's implausible that all such experiences indicate the presence of a wider self, as my examples of Montague and Mitchell show. And it's not plausible that the oneness of all things be part of a core content, as the first two examples that I deliberately picked of Foster and Montague show. Granting my broad characterization of richly structured mystical experiences, and given the variety of them from the smattering of reports that I presented, it's hard to defend the idea of a core content. A way of defending the claim to unanimity in the face of these difficulties is to provide a criterion restricting the class of experiences that are to be taken as candidates for mystical apprehensions of reality. And such a restriction must be, of course, non-question begging. Stace does this in a couple of ways. One of them is clearly question-based. He restricts the pool of experiences for which a common core is sought by limiting it to what he calls extrovertive mystical experiences, stipulated as having as part of their content that all is one, and that the one must be mental or at least vital. This stipulation is based on content, so seems blatantly question-begging if it's used to argue for a common core to mystical experiences. It excludes experiences such as those of Foster, Montague, and Mitchell mentioned earlier from counting against the anonymity of content. So they won't do. Stace also restricts the pool of richly structured mystical experiences by excluding all experiences taking the form of visions and voices. And he does this on the grounds, first, that they're widely taken by mystics to be unreliable, and second, that they involve sensuous imagery. This is a phenomenological restriction and not a restriction based on content, so it's arguably non-arbitrary and non-question-begging. The restriction seems rather ad hoc, though, in the respect that it excludes many experiences of visions and voices that have the phenomenal power of mystical experiences, such as the experience I mentioned earlier from Foster. And the restriction still doesn't plausibly deliver a core content of these experiences. For what could that core content be? That there's a unity or oneness to all things is a relatively uncontroversial view that would be accepted even by those adopting a physicalist worldview. The weakest substantive candidates for a core content would appear to be that there's a unity that's a mind or consciousness or life. To establish such a core content, it would have to be argued that although it wasn't clear from their reports, people like Montague and Mitchell really did experience such a unity, or that their experiences contain visions or voices and so were excluded by this restriction, or that there's some other restriction that excludes those experiences. So I conclude that it can't be claimed without begging the question that the existence of a mental or vital unity is part of a core content to all mystical experiences, or rather to all mystical experiences that have a content, the richly structured ones. However, there's another approach to vindicating third-person justification of belief in the content of mystical experiences that might be more plausible. It's to argue that when responding to evidence of conflicting contents, it's not necessary to show the existence of a core content. Instead, all that's necessary is that some of these contents are not contradicted by the contents of any other mystical experiences. So take, for example, the mystically revealed belief that there's a universal consciousness. Then ask, are there any reports of mystical experiences that present as a revelation that there is no universal consciousness? It seems not. So perhaps then that's all that's needed for the belief to be justified. However, it might turn out that this particular belief is indirectly contradicted by other mystical experiences. For example, there might be experiences purporting to reveal distinct, all-encompassing good and evil divinities, and that would conflict with the idea of a single universal consciousness. But as a more general point, adopting this approach may make the epistemic justification of the content of a mystical experience seem too easily satisfied and too contingent on other mystical experiences. For example, suppose an experience purported to reveal that the number 3 is sacred, or that one should face Mecca when praying. It would seem that whether these are to be taken as revelations of a truth shouldn't depend on whether there ever happens to be an experience purporting to reveal that the number 3 is not sacred, or that numbers can't be sacred, or that one shouldn't face Mecca when praying, or that one can face in any direction when praying. The bottom line, it doesn't appear that there's any non-question begging response to the problem of conflicting content. So neither kind of mystical experience provides a plausible justification of beliefs arising from the content of those experiences. Now I'm going to close with a few remarks on the transformative value that's widely claimed to stem from mystical experiences. Mystical experiences are generally thought to have transformative value because they cause a mystical belief, such as belief in God, the existence of a universal consciousness, or maybe the non-existence of individual selves. And that this belief then gives rise to valuable dispositions that transform the person's life. The dispositions typically cited are personal subjective ones, such as increase in the sense of meaningfulness, decrease in fear of death, as well as ethical ones, such as universal love and a reduction of selfishness. These dispositions, of course, arise regardless of whether belief whether the belief that causes them is true or justified. But it might be a bit of a downer if they can't be justified. The dispositions might weaken if confidence in the belief declined. And observers might take the value of the mystical experience to be diminished if the belief is false or unjustified. Even if this were true, however, it shouldn't be taken as diminishing the value of mystical experiences in general. These valued dispositions and the transformative effect on a person's life can arise directly from the mystical experience without requiring any such metaphysical beliefs, as we can see with the lives of people such as Foster, Montague, and Mitchell. The way I see this coming about is that all of these richly structured mystical experiences give rise to a blissful feeling of connection with the world in which one loses awareness of one's individual self with its aspirations and preoccupations. And this can be transformative when first experienced because it contrasts strikingly with the way all one's previous feelings of elation have arisen, namely from the fulfillment of existing desires, such as for success with a creative project or passion in a personal relationship, or just some state of affairs coming about. Maybe one's sports team wins or political party gets elected. The experience and memory of this selfless bliss can lead directly to the valued ethical dispositions of love towards all beings and attaching less importance to the previous aspirations of one's own self. And it can lead directly to valued personal dispositions too, experiences likely to enhance the sense of one's life having meaning, and decrease in preoccupation with one's individual self can also lead to less fear of one's own death. So I conclude that the value of mystical experiences doesn't require that they have justificatory force. The ways in which mystical experiences can ethically and subjectively transform lives for the better don't depend on their first inducing metaphysical beliefs. Well, that's it. Thanks for viewing, and I look forward to hearing your comments and questions. You can always contact me by email, and the address is latham@ucalgary.ca.
All right, thanks everybody for checking out this talk, and my name is Dani Caputi, and I am a founding member of Peace Inc., where I've been active for the past year or so, and especially since December, since finishing up my PhD at UC Davis. And so today I'm going to be talking about some technology that we deployed to a festival over Halloween weekend in 2019. And this talk is going to be focused mostly on the data side of things, but we are actually going to be demonstrating this technology in the Art Tech demo by Leo Madrid. So I encourage you all to check that out after you're done watching this, and you can see this all in action. Okay, so if you're watching this talk, I assume you're already somewhat on board and somewhat familiar with this hot button issue in consciousness research of mind-matter interactions. This idea that given intention, consciousness is able to influence physical systems in predictable and meaningful ways. That has been something that has been demonstrable in a number of experiments that have been replicated hundreds of times over the last century. But yet it's still something that does not get a lot of funding in mainstream science. And so the question is why, right? And so when something is not working the way we expect, we kind of have to take a step back, look at the whole problem, and approach it in a new way. And that's exactly what our organization did. And so what we've realized is that researchers seem to have tunnel vision on reproducing independent replications of these small effect sizes that can be readily produced in the lab, such as Ganzfeld, but without really building a working model that integrates these into the greater philosophical problems of consciousness and developing real-world applications with them. And so our approach is to come in through the application side, and we have already demonstrated through some previous work that developing applications seems to really be the key to increasing effect sizes. And then from there, the rest of this problem goes away. And so how do we do that? Because understandably, that's a pretty big claim if we're saying, hey, we have a way for you guys who are interested in this field, new researchers interested, to get funding. But basically what we're doing is we're taking a very simple feedback loop here that's really been known about, and this is something that will probably make intuitive sense. You have a person or an individual or a group of people who are paying attention on some physical system by which they can influence. Now, normally that physical system takes the form of a line on a page, in the form of a graph that goes up or down, the intensity of a single light, something like that. That's driven by non-random event detectors, which are electron tunneling devices that use the quantum avalanche effect to produce raw zeros and ones, so computer bits basically. Using that, when the attention is on the system, the effect size of the mind-machine interface increases, and so on and so forth. But if this is really a feedback loop, in the sense of this being a closed feedback that will exponentially increase the effect sizes with more and more attention, then how come that hasn't been observed in the lab? And the reason we think that this has not really been observed in its full potential to be really a feedback loop to drive these effect sizes up is because these experiments are missing the local aspect of the effect. Now, the event detectors that are being influenced can be non-local. They can be in another state. But if the interface is local, the way to kick this feedback loop into overdrive really is to scale up this local interface that an individual or a crowd is looking at. So a single lamp, while it can be very powerful, it is way more powerful when a lot of lamps are used, or extravagant music is played through this, or some application that's meaningful to the user is developed. Anything of that sort we've observed to be able to kick this feedback loop into effect. And I'm going to demonstrate that with the data from this experiment. And so the algorithm, there obviously has to be some algorithm between these non-random event detectors and this interface. And so to translate that into whatever it is an individual is interacting with, an individual or group, that is. And so what we found is that the algorithm should make it so that this application works well even under the Daniel Dennett view of consciousness, that none of this mind-machine interface is even possible, let alone consciousness being a real thing. But it should also work notably better with consciousness so as to encourage this entanglement to occur. And we're looking at ways right now to turbocharge this feedback loop with machine learning and a quantum computer called the D-Wave. And so what we actually claim to have built here is the world's first usable hybrid quantum computer that functions at room temperature and in a tabletop environment. And the way we're doing that is by using these non-random event detectors to basically program with our consciousness in this meaningful way, such that we get an effect size that's large enough to actually do computing with, and entangling it with a quantum computing platform. That part is not really the focus of this talk, but that aspect will be featured in the Art Tech demo of Leo Madrid. Okay, so what you're looking at here is really what drew me in to this startup. And so this work of art here was made by Leo, the other founder, and basically what it is 10 Celeron mind lamps that are independent from each other. So each one of these are being controlled by their own non-random event detectors. They're not communicating with each other, so at pretty much any given time it should look like this. Random colors on each one. However, during a group meditation, this is what it looked like. And so this is kind of the effect size of a mind-machine interaction that just stares at you in the face. And this is really what drew me in. And this is not an unusual result for this type of visual system. We see this typically at least once a day when it's running something of this level of coherence, especially at events and when we're in proximity to it and doing meditation sessions. And so this really indicates to us that we're on the right track with this feedback loop and focusing on the local effect. Okay, so as good as those Celeron mind lamps in a circle are, unfortunately they're not able to record data. And so what we did was we built our own LED screens, which function in a very similar way, and we brought them to the Apparitions Music Festival in Rosarito, Mexico over the Halloween weekend. And now this is a underground festival. It's not like Burning Man or EDC, so attendance is typically under 1,000. This year it was especially low due to what you're looking at right here, which was a photo I took the night before during an evacuation we had to do. So that was fun. But nonetheless, we had enough turnout to let the show go on. And so it consisted of basically 3 different areas, even though this is a small underground festival, 3 different areas where music was playing pretty much 24/7 from various DJs. And in addition to that, so we had our LED panels deployed at the main stage, and we also had a central ballroom where people can come and do brainwave entrainment sessions with sound and headsets in the presence of this lighting that you're looking at, which are also driven by their own non-random event detectors. And so this festival was really consciousness themed in every respect, and we were a centerpiece of this show. Okay, and this is a close-up of the panels that you're looking at. Now, instead of driving them by individual non-random event detectors for each color node, we used a single true RNG device, which can run much, much faster than the Celeron units. And so these were able to drive all of them at once. We were able to split the bit stream such that it worked that way. And we used a measure of autocorrelation in the colors to approximate the aesthetic value. So you can imagine if these colors are more unified with less sharp gradients, that would be more aesthetic to most people. And the color displays change every 3.5 seconds, and we run 1,000 simulations per second to make sure that you're going to be looking at something attention grabbing no matter what, and that helps kick this local feedback loop into effect. And just worth noting is that we have another non-random event detector collecting background data in our meditation room. Okay, so this schematic just gives a more systematic look to the algorithm I just discussed. We have a true RNG selecting a 1 of 8 possible colors for each node. It goes into the vector Moran's eye calculation and runs 1,000 trials and spits out the maximally autocorrelated thing so that it will still look good even without coherence, but it'll look better with coherence, and then we can use chi-square analysis and Fisher's method to get overall p-values. Okay, and so hypotheses to test. The first thing we want to look at is cumulative effects. And so the average Moran's eye value, so this is something I'm going to keep bringing up. Moran's eye, that's basically your autocorrelation coefficient, functions just like any other correlation coefficient, goes between 0 and 1. That tells you how unified the colors are, and we want high values of it optimally. That corresponds to more aesthetics. And so just if we look at the average Moran's eye, we see that we do not get a significantly greater than chance degree of autocorrelation average throughout the whole festival. Further, we looked at the raw bytes for comparison with some traditional experiments with these devices that have been done at other events looking for field consciousness effects. What we find is that both the REG from the panel that drive the panel, which you see here in red, and the one running in the meditation room both terminate within the envelopes of chance expectation. However, the trends are a little more striking. The one driving the panel has some significant trends in both direction, while the one in the meditation room just kind of stays at baseline. Now when we combine the two bit streams, the one driving the panel and the one in the meditation room, and we do a chi-square analysis between those, we end up with a significant result at the end when comparing the two. P-value of about 0.03 at the end of the festival. And this part's exploratory here, but if we just look at 4 a.m. Monday onward, at the very end, we have a very striking upward trend. And this is consistent with some previous observations that my colleague had at prior events, where this state of coherence is typically observed towards the end of festivals and during the cleanup. Okay, and so this is the real meat of what we're trying to test here, because it's one thing if we can show coherence on average, but what we really want to see is if you have coherence that correspond to real-world events, and those two are not mutually exclusive. And as far as this hypothesis played out, this could not have gone better, in my view. So I'll start out by explaining the left half of this graph first, up to that red line. You see this is pseudo-random number generator data that we had it running in, the panels running in, and that was an accident, but it ended up being something we were able to use later. But for this analysis, we're only concerned with once we switched it over to the true RNG mode, starting at about 4:30 a.m. on that first night. Looking from that red line to the right, there were three notable events that occurred. One of them was Troy Pierce, our first headliner, ending his set, and that was right after we switched modes. Another one was our other headliner, Alexei Delano, on stage. Now those events correspond to the first spike you see, the first very big spike after the red line, and the final three spikes towards the end. Those were some of the biggest spikes of coherence we had during the whole show. And the big spike you see in the middle corresponds to a brainwave entrainment session that me and my colleague did on stage right in front of the lights as a demonstration. And I didn't have this experience, but my colleague said it was a very profound experience of entrainment with the machine in front of him. And so we used that as one of our three events that we specified in advance for looking for spikes, and sure enough, it all played out almost like clockwork. And so if we come here and look at the Bosch 2006 meta-analysis of a whole bunch of experiments that have been done with these electron tunneling devices, if we go back to our original stated goal of increasing effect sizes, it looks like we have basically accomplished just that. If we look at our effect size and compare that with the others that have been done, we're greater than about 90% of the others that exist in the literature, and almost all of them given our sample size. So that's a good sign that we're on the right track. Okay, and then the last question we might ask is, does the effect scale with crowd size, the number of people looking at the panels? And the answer is yes, it does. So we took observations of basically the number of people on the dance floor at single points in time, and then I looked at a 15-minute sliding window around that with all the Morin's-I values in that 15-minute sliding window that change every 3.5 seconds. And so comparing that to the maximum in that 15-minute distribution, there's a correlation there with a number of people looking at it. If you look at the skewness of that distribution, you get a similar positive trend. If you look at the chi-square comparison between the meditation room non-random event detector and the one driving the panels, you get a similar effect as well. And so I don't know if this is going to extrapolate linearly when we get into huge crowd size numbers, but it was exciting to see this relationship nonetheless with even less than 100 people. And so this part is really exploratory here, but basically what I looked at was not just the maximum and skewness of that 15-minute sliding window Morin's-I distribution, but I looked at the whole distribution. And what we found was that, as we saw before, is that the correlation with crowd size was positive and strong for the maximum, the upper tail of the distribution, but what we didn't expect was that it was also there for almost this entire lower half of the distribution. And so that was surprising in its own way. So it seems like more people looking at the panels did really two things. It both increased the maximum aesthetics that it gave, and also increased the minimums that it gave. So that was interesting, and what was really interesting is the pseudo mode gave nearly an identical pattern. Not as statistically significant or as striking as with the true RNG, but nonetheless we have a band of significant correlation at the top and bottom ends of the distribution. Okay, so the conclusions from this field study is that there's a huge public demand for this type of technology, which can produce experiences of feeling at one with the local machine interface, which is itself functioning as an extension of our local consciousness, propagated by the feedback loop we discussed. Field consciousness can amplify in the presence of this interactive local interface, and it provides a testable model for individual and collective consciousness. And so we're kind of in the rapid development phase right now, not just with light and sound, but putting this into other innovations and applications and using the same feedback loop that increases mind-machine interface effects, which are connected to our supercomputer hub. And so I'll use this opportunity again to cross-reference the Art Tech demo by Leo Madrid, and I'm featured in that video as well, and we will discuss this stuff at greater length. Okay, so I don't think I need to convince anyone here that there's an urgency for a fully scaled industry of this type that wages new technology around peace. And so our real success is going to be if we manage to start a movement and succeed as a model around further innovation of consciousness-driven technology. And so this is an open call for anyone to come join us and get involved at any level. This is a multidisciplinary movement, so there is a place for almost anyone in it, regardless of skill sets or talent. And our website is haloai.me, which we also demonstrate in the Art Tech video. And thank you for your attention.
Hi, I'm Erola Pons, and I'm going to present you our research project on the sense of self in meditation and depersonalization. I've been a meditator for several years, and the first time I read about depersonalization, I was astonished by the apparent similarities it has to the Buddhist notion of non-self, or that the self is an illusion. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I'm going to try to explain it briefly and very simplified. And for this, I would like you to try something. Observe your visual field. And be aware of the one who's observing. You can pause the video a few seconds to try that. Okay, so did you find any observer? Maybe you feel located inside your head, behind your eyes. If you pay close attention to this observer, it might take some training, but at some point you may realize that there's actually no observer. That this observer, which we usually identify ourselves with, is actually just a product of ongoing mental processes, but it doesn't really exist as a separate entity. And the same is true for the hearer, the thinker, or the doer. Realizing that these parts that constitute the sense of self are actually an illusion can be profoundly liberating. But not always. Sometimes this realization can be very distressing and cause panic attacks, especially in people who did not aim for this insight, but who got it as a result of intense stress, trauma, cannabis use, or an organic cause like stroke. Their perceptual changes look very similar to those in meditators. I feel like a detached observer of myself, my body, my thoughts, my actions. Parts of my body feel as if they didn't belong to me. When I move, I do not seem to feel in control of the movement. When something hurts, it feels as someone else's pain. If I cry or laugh, I do not seem to feel any emotions at all. Okay, so it seems that depersonalization, like symptoms in meditators, lead mostly to liberation from suffering, while in other people, they lead mostly to an increased suffering. So the question is, how come? I am not aware of any empirical research addressing this question, and we would like to fill this gap by performing several behavioral and neuroimaging experiments, 2 of which are summarized in the poster. But unfortunately, I cannot present you any results yet because we will have the first participants soon. We will invite meditators experiencing a dissolved sense of self and people with a higher score in the Cambridge Depersonalization scale, as well as control participants, both meditators and non-meditators. But I need to clarify here that when I talk about meditators in the poster and for the rest of the presentation, I'm referring to meditators experiencing these depersonalization-like symptoms, but with positive valence. We will assess their sense of body ownership and agency and provide them a few questionnaires covering different parts of their experience. Before going into detail about the experiments, I first want to mention that I understand the sense of self in a kind of a predictive coding approach. As I see it, we perceive the world largely based on our internal models that represent the world. These internal models are shaped by the sensory input, and their relative weight given to the internal models versus sensory input can be modulated. Our hypothesis is that people with depersonalization-like symptoms, either meditators or non-meditators, give more weight to the sensory input and less weight to the internal models. For body ownership, we will perform several versions of the rubber hand illusion paradigm, which most of you will know, but in short consists on simultaneously stroking the hidden hand of the participant and an artificial hand which the participant is observing. This often creates the illusion that the artificial hand belongs to the own body. We expect that meditators have a lower illusion because they would give more weight to interoception and proprioception. And we also expect that people with depersonalization have a higher illusion because they would give less weight to internal models of the self, including a less constrained body image, which would allow a higher ownership of the fake hand. To assess agency, we will perform a task that consists on doing such a movement while observing a visual feedback of the movement that has been experimentally distorted, and then reporting an estimate of the perceived direction of the movement. So imagine that you move towards 11 o'clock, but you see on a mirror the reflection from a screen that shows you a dot moving towards 10 o'clock. And you then say that you moved towards almost 11 o'clock. You can see that you weighted visual information less than the movement. The visual information is basically sensory input, obviously, but the movement contains both the sensory input, proprioception, and internal models which make use of the efference copy, which is this internal copy of your motor command that helps the brain predict the sensory consequences of your actions. But we wanted to disentangle the weight given to internal models, and for this we will repeat the experiment but with passive movement. So the experimenter will be the one controlling the participant's hand. And this way the efference copy will be lacking. In these passive trials, we will be able to differentiate the weight given to visual feedback versus to proprioception, and this will allow us to get an approximate estimate of the weight given to the efference copy in the active trials. Actually, this hasn't been studied in healthy participants either, so it will also be interesting to know what happens in them. We expect that in the active trials, they weigh more the movement, and in the passive trials, they weigh more the visual feedback because the efference copy will be missing. We also expect meditators to give a high weight to proprioception, which would result in a good estimate in both cases, so an estimate closer to the movement. And we also hypothesize the estimate of people with depersonalization to be around the middle in both cases because the afferent copy wouldn't play much a role anyway. If this turns out to be true, this could provide some evidence to our hypothesis that people with depersonalization-like symptoms, either meditators and non-meditators, give lower weight to internal models and higher weight to sensory input. If you would like to know more, or you would like to discuss the methods and hypotheses or the theory behind this all, just reach out and I'll be very happy to talk.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Scott Four, and I joined the conference from Tucson, Arizona, in the midst of this COVID crisis, and with wellness wish for everyone. I'm pleased to speak to you in relation to a prospective study, the form of which I present by abstract. In brief, my background: I'm a neurologist, a physician. I originate from Michigan, trained at Michigan State University Medical School, and went on to residency at the University of Arizona in Tucson. I've been in private practice now for upwards of 30 years, and the course of my career has, in large part, led to a focus on memory and data acquisition, data collection, data management, data storage, and even larger than that is, where do all these memories that we generate, where do they come from? And some of the background is I became interested in hypnosis, back in 1974. My father offered significant educational input along the way prior to medical school. In his career as a psychiatrist, he was a protege of Sigmund Freud, and so I carry forward a background with respect to consciousness and the identity of each person, who we are, to this present day of my practice. The focus is titled Healing of Memories, and I'm the founder of Christ Connections, Infinite Consciousness and Infinite Intelligence. I've been struck in my career as a neurologist with respect to memory, with specifically Alzheimer's patients, where we know that there's an area of brain that is not functional, temporal lobes, illness, and there's pathology. And these individuals, patients, express an inability to recall, or family says they lost their memory. Yet one of the striking things is that on numerous occasions, it may be familiar to many of you, in interactions with a patient with dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or some other type, somewhere, somehow, spontaneously, it may be in runs of seconds to minutes, in a dramatic way, someone can be completely there, lucid, alert, and functional with all the memory, as if, well, no one's lost it. It's there. It's there, it's been there, and it's not going anywhere. And by extension, the pathology, the area of the brain, is known to fail with respect to memory recall, the temporal lobes. Well, we know that is pathologic. So the inference is that the difficulty is in the modulation or the functional ability of the brain tissue to allow oneself to be represented in physical reality. The memory is there. In that regard, if the memory, with preservation of memory, it is also anecdotally of interest to note that people who convey near-death experiences have a dramatic, well-preserved memory of an experience or an event in which a clinical death is said to have occurred. So one has to ask, where did they acquire this memory? There's anecdotal occasions in which certain people, we'll call them meditatives, priests, religious, yogis, have some incredible dimensions of mind. We'll call it enhancements of memory, in which they come to acquire knowledge of information from outside themselves, which, for lack of a better way to say it, comes without much of an explanation. For example, there's a yogic meditator. There are those who are said or be known to have demonstrated some form of ability to read another people's mind. In the religious sense, or a priest, they are said to be able, on occasion, some to be able to read a person's soul, to know what's in that other person's memory, which in turn implies that there's something outside of each one of us that is, and we're going to reflect back on Dr. Baum, some hidden variable that allows some transmission of information to one individual to another, or from outside of oneself to an individual. And that I shall call consciousness with the big C. That there's the proposal of the study stems from these observations, and what the proposal takes into consideration is to study meditators and to study memory over a 10-year span of time. The cultural memory, where the starting point is to accept cultural memory as it's been given to us, and to take the standpoint that each individual, each meditator in this study is the instrument, with the cultural memory being given to us that there is a creator, a consciousness of the cosmos outside of ourselves, and that by transmission of memory throughout thousands of years, we are the end result, the created, the instrument that interacts with that which is outside of ourselves. So in proposition, the task is to use each one of us individually to create groups of meditators with type, and that as each one of us, each meditator, an instrument, we then use, the proposal is to find metrics to see or measure or identify the extent to which that from which is outside accessed changes the instrument. Each one of us, in terms of brain function, neuroplasticity, and areas of brain, as might then have some brain map of function or modulation in relation to that data acquisition that comes from outside and is taken within. That's in part known that the function of neuroplasticity can be seen by studies already done in which brain waves from certain regions of the brain, the cingulate gyrus may rise in a gamma range when measurements are taken from experienced meditators. And let's call that someone who is 50 minutes or more a day, as compared to those who are non-meditators who do not produce this gamma activity. With that, I would like to engage in a multi-center study format, meditators, non-meditators, at different times of day directed to meditation, with each meditator then defining themselves into the type of meditation which they believe they are doing, whether it be contemplation, mindfulness, mantra, and that would be an additional data collection during a 10-year study, as might define certain areas of brain neuroplasticity, areas of brain enhancement or function or change of function, which occur also depending on type. Part of the aspects or dimensions of brain that can be measured along the way can be accomplished by PET scans, brain mapping, MRIs, electroencephalograms, personality inventories, distress scales, psychological distress scales, all with an intent to create or identify and accomplish accumulation of metrics that will in some way demonstrate that which is accessed from outside ourselves changes that which is inside of each one of us. And with that, I invite any and all of you to contact me at any time, and if there is an opportunity or an interest to in some way participate or move ahead in a multi-facility study, let me know, and I'd be happy to join y'all with my best efforts to investigate and learn along with everyone else. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure being able to talk and meet with you today. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. This is Professor Jayapal Dudeja. I am going to talk to you on scientific analysis of mantra-based meditation and its beneficial effects. This is listed in the concurrent session C22. To start with, I will introduce myself briefly. My basic area of interest is laser science and technology, for which I have been working for the last 45 years or so. In this area, I have worked as a professor and scientist. For the same area, I have been listed as the world's who is who in science and engineering. Till recently, I was also the director, Amity Institute of Laser Technology at Amity University, Gurgaon in India. Around 12 years ago, I retired as a senior scientist in Defense R&D Organization, Government of India. Besides this contribution of mine in the field of laser science and technology, for the last few years, I have also developed some interest in the area of science, spirituality, consciousness, etc. For this, I have written 4 books. The first book is the Gayatri Mantra, a GPS to Enlightenment. The second book is Mahamrityunjay Mantra, an invincible armor for conquering death. The third book is Ajapa Japa Soham Hansa Mantra, an eternal mantra for inner consciousness. The third eye, that is the fourth book, the third eye, a spiritual laser for stimulating inner awakening. Besides this, I have published over 20 research papers on science of consciousness. Okay. Now, the topic for me, chosen by me in this session, is mantra-based meditation. What is meditation? The word meditation comes from the Latin word meditatum, which means to ponder. Definition of meditation. Meditation is a technique for resting the mind and transferring it to the state of restful alertness. Meditation is a practice of focus or relaxed attention or contemplation upon a thought or attention on sound or a mantra or an object or on visualization of the breath in order to increase awareness of the self at the present moment, thus resulting in the enhancement of personal and spiritual growth. Sometimes I keep on telling my friends that meditation is a medicine for the mental constipation, or meditation is a spiritual food for the hungry soul. Now, aim of any meditation technique is to modify the brain waves to the desired level. Brain waves are electrical impulses in the brain measured by EEG. There are mainly 5 types of brain waves: delta waves 0.5 to 4 Hertz, theta waves 4 to 8 Hertz, alpha waves 8 to 13 Hertz, beta waves 13 to 39 Hertz, gamma waves 40 to 140 Hertz. Now these are the patterns of the brain, all the 5 waves, brain waves, which I have just listed. And I will describe them one by one briefly. Delta waves. Delta waves are the slowest, that means the lowest frequency brain waves. These are explained in a deep, these are experienced in a deep, dreamless sleep and in a state of deep transcendental meditation. These waves are also found most often in infants as well as young children. Deep sleep is important for the healing process as it is linked with calming and rejuvenation of the mind. Optimal delta waves result into a better immune system, natural healing, and deep sleep. Next is theta waves. Theta brain waves occur most often in sleep, but are also dominant during deep meditation. In theta state, we are in a state of vivid imagery, intuition, and information beyond normal consciousness awareness. Optimal theta waves result into creativity, emotional connection, intuition, relaxation, and it makes us feel more natural. Next is alpha waves. Alpha brain waves are dominant during quietly flowing thoughts while one is in deep relaxation, or when one is slipping into a lovely daydream, or during light meditation. Alpha is the frequency between consciousness thinking and subconscious mind. Optimal alpha waves result into deep relaxation and natural flow state of thoughts. Beta waves. Beta brain waves are associated with normal waking consciousness and in a heightened state of alertness, logical and critical reasoning. Having the right amount of beta allows us to focus on our task anywhere, whether in the classroom, workplace, or sports ground. Optimal beta waves result into conscious focus, improved memory, and problem-solving skills. Last in this type of waves is gamma waves, which are the fastest, that means the highest frequency brain waves in the brainwave state, which relate to simultaneous processing of information from different brain waves. These waves are involved in higher processing of multitasks as well as cognitive functioning. Optimal gamma waves result into better memory, improved learning skills, optimally regulating senses, better cognition, information processing of multitasks, and better perception. Now coming to types of meditation techniques. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of types of meditation techniques, depending upon the nation, the area, the religion, the groups, cults, etc. But I am listing here below the main types of meditations: Hindu meditation techniques, Buddhist meditation techniques, Jain meditation, Sikhism meditation, Christian meditation, Parsi meditation, Chinese meditation, and the guided meditation techniques, to name a few. Now, coming to my main topic, mantra-based meditation. What is mantra? The word mantra comes from the Sanskrit language. Here, man means mind and tra means release. So, a mantra is a combination of transcendental sounds meant to release mind from all the anxieties of material life and bring peace and clarity. One gets miraculous advantages by making use of the energy of mantra. The mantra could be a meaningful word or words, or even a meaningless sound word. What is important is that the frequency of mantra that helps transform the practitioner to a new level of consciousness. What is mantra-based meditation? Mantra-based meditation is also known as japa meditation, from the Sanskrit word muttering. Chanting of mantra, that is japa, means uttering the mantra several times, repeatedly, rhythmically, periodically, and coherently. There are a large number of mantras used for meditation, but in the current presentation, I have opted for Bija Mantras or single syllable mantras. What do we mean by Bija Mantra? A Bija Mantra or seed mantra is a single syllable sound used in meditation. There are a number of Bija Mantras and they each have intense vibratory qualities. Out of a large number of Bija Mantras, I choose here only those mantras which are specifically used to heal, balance, and energize the chakras, that is the energy centers in the human subtle body. Now, what are chakras? Chakras literally meaning wheels. A Sanskrit term, these are the wheel-like energy centers in the human subtle body, aligned along the spinal cord, forming the integrating channel. Chakras are various focal points used in a variety of ancient meditation techniques. They serve as the collection and transmission centers for both subtle, metaphysical, and biophysical energy. Chakras are the crux of the human system. These are also called the cosmic energy organs in the human body. Although there are many chakras, in fact, some people have gone talking about as many as 114 chakras. But the most popular ones are the 7 chakras. These chakras, 7 chakras are Mooladhara or base or root chakra, Swadhisthana meaning sacral chakra, Manipura meaning solar plexus or navel chakra, Anahata meaning heart chakra, Vishuddha meaning throat chakra, Agna meaning third eye chakra or bro chakra or pineal gland, and 7th Sahasrara or crown chakra. This is the picture displaying the location of all the 7 chakras. Now, since I was talking about Bija Mantras, I will be, for the first 6 chakras, starting from the bottom, there are 6 Bija Mantras. Lam, Vam, Ram, Yam, Hum, Om. Om is for the Agna chakra. And in the last column, their frequencies are given. 261, like this. You can note from the last column that all these frequencies are in the audible range, except for one frequency, which is 7.86 of Om, which is not in the audible range. We will talk about Om, which is a very powerful mantra, subsequently in little more details. Now, these Bija Mantras can be categorized in the area of sound therapy for healing, balancing, and energizing of these chakras. So how do you do Bija Mantra based meditation? These are the practical steps. Listen to me carefully. I will talk taking one mantra, one particular chakra, and go up to the last. And then you have to do the same thing for the remaining chakras. Let us talk about the base chakra or the root chakra, that is Mooladhara chakra. For this chakra, the Bija mantra is Lam. So the procedure is keep your back straight and vertical, but not tense. Just feel tall within your body. Close your eyes softly, like a sleeping baby. Relax and remain silent in this posture for a couple of minutes. Now pay attention onto your nostrils and watch your breath. After you have settled in this position, inhale slowly and deeply. Then exhale and simultaneously utter the Bija mantra corresponding to this particular chakra. Let us say the base chakra, which is Lam, with a mental focus on the location of this chakra. Hold your breath for a few seconds with a focus on this chakra. Then release the breath slowly and keep sitting like this at least for a few seconds. Repeat. Utter this mantra for more number of times. Let us say 7 times for this particular chakra. Now repeat the whole cycle for each of these 6 chakras one by one, uttering their Bija mantras. Okay. So, one second. Now I will talk about the special part, that is the Om. Om is the Bija Mantra, which is the Bija Mantra for the Agna Chakra. Okay. This, I just lost my slides. Just a minute. Yes. So Om is the most sacred symbol. It is primordial. Om was revered before the birth of all the religions in the world. According to the scriptures written thousands of years ago, the sound Om was the first energy created at the time of the disturbance of the equilibrium. It has been accepted in Hindu religion that Om, the first primordial sound energy, that is Brahmanada, emerged in the process of creation. It is the sound form of consciousness. Similarly, Om is aparushaya. That means it is not man-made, because it is just like one hand clapping. One hand clapping, that is unstruck sound, which cannot be man-made. Then Om is perennial, because Om is Akshara, which literally means immutable or imperishable. Om is perennial, meaning that it is timeless, everlasting, which is valid in the past, present, and future. Lastly, Om is universal, because it doesn't belong to a particular religion. Om is revered in many religions in the world: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, etc., to name a few. It is therefore universal. Now, there are three frequencies of the Om mantra. 136.1 hertz, which is equivalent to the Earth's rotation. Just, it can be calculated. It has been shown in my slide how I have calculated 136.1 hertz as the 32nd octave of the Earth's rotation. Second frequency is 7.86, and third frequency is 432 hertz, which is the frequency of Om in the musical scale Om. So, after these three frequencies, the last slide is a beautiful slide. I am calling it nasal sound, Anuswaram. It's a beautiful slide. In India, we also call it Brahmari Pranayama. That means just close your ears, eyes, and the nose, and like a honeybee mantra, say, this creates nitric oxide in us, which is very important for many applications, like all the trillions of cells communicating with each other. People having diabetes, they are having low nitric oxide, so do this meditation. People having high blood pressure can do this, and so on. So there are, as we can see, that there are a lot of benefits for this meditation. And this is, thank you very much for your this attention. I am Professor Jayapal Dudeja. My email and mobile are written over here. Thank you.
Esteemed members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, let me introduce myself. I work as a professor in the Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering in a premier institute of technology in the state of Kerala, India. I started my teaching career in 1985. Over these long years, I have taught many courses on electronics. Currently, the courses I'm most interested in are artificial intelligence, embedded systems, computer architecture, and so on. I have written books in this field. I have published papers and worked on numerous projects in the field of electronics. But as you can see, the topics of consciousness and philosophy are not related to my profession. It is over the last 10 years that I developed an interest in these topics. I had always been a propounder of the practice of alternate medicine. And around 7 years back, I learned the technique of pranic healing, which is an effective method, a very effective method of energy healing. From that time onwards, I have done extensive learning of the topics of consciousness, energy, and related spiritual traditions. The paper that I am presenting is based on my experience, study, and convictions. What is science? It's a practice aimed at the pursuit of knowledge. What we call modern science is concerned only about the physical world. It has certain well-defined, systematic methods and well-entrenched dogmas. As times change, it is imperative to expand the horizon of science and to accept new ways of thinking and evaluating. Why is the concept of consciousness being studied so much now? Modern scientists are studying it because questions are coming up as to how the brain acts as a center of consciousness. The veracity of the brain being the center of consciousness is also being challenged. After 100 years or more of study on the brain structure, functions, patterns, and so on, scientists are still not clear on this, and research is going on. But for long, modern science has told us that consciousness is a function of the brain, that thinking, reasoning, feeling, etc. are all activities related to the brain. We have been told that the mind is created by the brain. All this is based on the belief that the physical body is all that there is to life, and on the dogma that only matter is what the world is based on. But what do ancient Hindu scientists say? Eastern traditions, and more specifically Indian sciences, have presented and preserved the concept that the brain is not the center of consciousness. The brain is just the physical organ which receives stimuli from the external world and passes it on to the higher planes. The brain is also involved in receiving commands from higher planes and passing it on to the physical body. So ancient Indian scientists have written a number of books on science, and the number is mind-blowing. There are books on deep knowledge in every field. The outside world has become aware of it only in the last 100 to 150 years. All these sciences have been coated with spirituality and Sanskrit. Sanskrit is an Indian language, but not all Indians know it. But most Indian languages have a high percentage of words from Sanskrit. All the Sanskrit words that I will use in this presentation are also available in my native language, which is Malayalam. Many Indians and also people from outside India have done studies and translations of these books, mostly into English. This has benefited those without knowledge of Sanskrit, and this knowledge of esoteric sciences has been transported to other countries. So talking about consciousness, the word Chaitanya is used for consciousness in Sanskrit. Chaitanya has been defined and analyzed in all these books that I was talking about. The Upanishads are one among the many sources from which we get knowledge of consciousness, among other things. According to these theories, Chaitanya or consciousness is manifested in every particle of the universe. But what is the source of this consciousness? It is Brahman or Paramatma, the ultimate and only reality. We also use terms such as universal consciousness or cosmic consciousness or divine consciousness. These are English words which are used currently. In this presentation, we are going to see how this divine consciousness manifests in human beings in different levels. My attempt will be to explain this in terms of the multidimensional human body. This presentation discusses this concept, which is already widely known to those who are aware of the spiritual side of existence. So let's talk about what you mean by planes of consciousness or states of being. Think of this. An injury to the body is on the physical plane because it's on the physical body. But the pain is experienced in the plane of feeling. Suppose you are in love. You may be totally in the emotional plane and you may even surpass all reason. Similarly, there's a state in which you may be in a fit of anger, and that's also being in an emotional plane. Maybe we consider that as a lower emotion in comparison with the state of being in love. Also, when we are engrossed in intellectual activity, we are in a plane of thought. We forget everything else. In general, all our actions are motivated by desires but guided by reason. Not for everyone. Some people are totally motivated by desires and emotions. But some people, when mature and wise, they are in the plane of wisdom. Still others have experienced euphoric and blissful states. In fact, all of us would have experienced such states. Then you would have heard of people reporting states of super consciousness, feeling of being one with the universe. So in short, we go to various places of consciousness. How does all this happen? Thinkers, scientists, neurologists are trying to find out the mechanism of these phenomena. Is the brain qualified to perform all this? Can chemical reactions lead to emotions and intuitive thoughts? Where in the brain is memory? Many scientists are looking for new explanation. If you see that list of my references, they are books written by scientists who want to have new explanations on how these things happen. To answer these questions in the way that I am trying to present, we need to think beyond materialistic science. We need to give up the concept that matter is all that is there to physical experience. We need to give up the idea that life exists only in the physical form. According to the ancient Indian rishis who were immersed in the pursuit of knowledge, the universe and everything in it is just energy, the human body also. We have multiple bodies, each of which vibrates at different frequencies. These bodies have different frequencies of vibration. The physical body has the lowest vibrational frequency and is visible in the physical domain. These bodies interpenetrate the same space, and the part that extends outside the physical body is called the aura. Many people would have heard the term aura, it's commonly known. These bodies are not as if one covers the other. It means it's not an onion skin model. These bodies can occupy the same space because their frequencies are different. And higher bodies have higher frequencies. I'll have to tell you what is meant by a higher body. The physical body is actually considered the lowest body and it has the lowest frequency of vibration. The three main bodies we are talking about, the word is sharir in Sanskrit. The body is physical body or sthula sharir, subtle body or sukshma sharir, causal body or karana sharir. We'll talk about it. These are the English and corresponding Sanskrit. Now if you look at this picture, you can get an idea. So a person, he has a physical body, he has a subtle body, he has a causal body. He is the sum total of these three bodies. And these three bodies occupy the same space except for the extension outside the physical body. There is an energy field corresponding to each of these bodies extends outside the physical body. Essentially, a person is a combination, sum total of these three bodies. We know the physical body, but most of us don't know that behind the working of the physical body, many invisible bodies are present. The physical body is what gives us an identity in the physical world. We know its function, and now I'm telling you that the frequency of vibration of this is the lowest. The next we have the subtle body, which is also called sukshma sharir, where sukshma means fine. There are further subdivisions of the subtle body. Its frequencies of vibrations are higher than the physical body. We have the Karana Sharir or the causal body. This is the seed body or the cause of the other bodies. Why one person is short and stout, another person is tall and slim, why another person has a different mental capacity and that certain other person has a very low mental capacity. All these, the reasons for all these are coded in the causal body or the Karana Sharir. This chart shows the functions of the bodies. The causal body we've already seen, which is a seed body, and it has the function of being the source of intuition and bliss. And the subtle body has 3 divisions, out of which we look at the wisdom body. There's a division called wisdom, mind body, and pranic body. The wisdom body takes care of abstract intellect. It gives wisdom. Mind body takes care of ordinary thoughts and emotion. And the pranic body is very important. It supplies the energy necessary for the functioning of the physical body. This figure shows these bodies. So you can see that there is a physical body, then you can see a pranic body, a mind body, wisdom body, and the bliss body. The energy fields of all the bodies are present at the same time in the same space because they are at different frequencies. The aura is shown for each body, and if you look, the final aura, the biggest aura is for the bliss body, and generally we call it the aura, the total energy field, the extension, the maximum energy extension, we call it the outer aura. Now if you look at the bliss body, this is the causal body itself. It's a source of intuition and bliss. The wisdom body, look at the wisdom body, it has a frequency lower than the bliss body or the causal body. And the fine matter in this body allows us to surpass the trends of lower emotions and thoughts. When this, for example, if your mind is muddled with desires and thoughts and worries, we need a layer of discernment and discrimination. That comes from your wisdom body. Now look at the mind body. The mind body is also called the manas. It takes care of emotions and thoughts. So because there are thoughts as well as emotions, Theosophists have divided into an emotional body of low frequency and a mental body which is of higher frequency. So emotional body takes care of emotions and the mental body of thoughts. Before I talk about the pranic body, I should mention what prana means. Prana is the name for life force. Prana is what makes us alive. Actually, prana is the universal life force. Essentially, it is the universal consciousness itself. When prana departs from the physical body, we are no longer alive in the physical plane. So, prana is essentially universal life force itself. But there is an invisible body through which there is an explicit flow of prana. That body is called the pranic body. This body is a homogeneous body of fine energy. Prana flows through this body through a network of nadis, which are energy channels. Just like we have a nervous system, we have an energy nervous system, and this network is called nadi network. And in this pranic body, there are centers of energy. And these centers are called chakras, and many people have started hearing about chakras. The pranic body is the exact double of the physical body, which means we have a pranic brain, pranic hands, pranic heart, pranic lungs, and so on. So the pranic body is the invisible supplement to the physical body. Without this pranic body, our physical body cannot do anything. Energy healing techniques are applied on the pranic body. This pranic body is the interface between the higher bodies and the physical body. For example, feelings from the mind body are sent to the physical brain through the pranic brain. Stimuli from the sense organs pass to the higher planes through the pranic interface. Now let's view these bodies in different ways. First, we will view them as energy. Actually, we have already done that. The causal body constitutes energy of the highest frequency, and the physical body constitutes energy of the lowest frequency. We can also view these bodies as matter and energy are the same. All our bodies are matter itself. The physical body is gross matter and the other bodies are hierarchically fine matter. The causal body consists of the finest matter. These bodies should also be viewed as multiple dimensions of consciousness. At any point in time, each of us operates in multiple planes of consciousness. One or more planes may be dominant at any time. The energy vibration of those bodies changes and create a pattern. When we are in a philosophical mood, the wisdom body is our plane of consciousness. The matter in it vibrates and creates a pattern. When in the emotional state, the energy vibrations in the mind body is predominant. In short, the different bodies vibrate strongly when they are called to action to take us to different planes of consciousness. The effect of these vibrations reach the physical body through the pranic interface. Human existence on earth. What exactly is life on earth? To express it in a single line, it is the manifestation of individualized divine consciousness into matter. So what is this divine consciousness? We call it Brahman, Paramatma, cosmic consciousness, cosmic soul, etc. This is a unique and only one energy, one and only one energy. It is formless and has no attributes. When multiple entities are to be created, there is a need of individualization. The universal consciousness is Paramatma, where Param means highest. The individualized consciousness is called Atma. The Atma is a spark of Paramatma. The Atma has to take on necessary instruments to have an existence on the physical plane. The Atma is then called Jivatma, where Jiva means living. In short, we shall conclude that the Atma, the individualized mark of Paramatma, manifesting on the physical plane is the Jivatma. The consciousness at the level of Atma is the same as that of universal consciousness. By lowering itself into matter, this consciousness becomes veiled. Now we'll discuss another way of looking at the bodies. The Jivatma needs to think, feel and act when it wants to live in the physical world. So it needs instruments for that. These instruments are called vehicles. Our bodies are the vehicles or the instruments. They are also called the coverings of the Atma because these bodies cover the Atma and veils its pure consciousness. This figure shows this concept. You can see the Atma at the center. The covering closest to it is called the Vijnayanamaya Kosha. It is the same as the causal body, which is of the finest matter and the source of intuition and bliss. So that is the closest to the Atma. Next, a less lower level of covering is the Vijnayanamaya Kosha, same as the wisdom body. Lower than that, we have the Manomaya Kosha, the same as your mind body. Then the Pranamaya Kosha, the same as a Pranic Body, and the Annamaya Kosha, which is a physical body. This slide shows the Sanskrit terms for these sheets, that is causal body, Anandamaya Kosha, for the bliss body, and similarly the divisions of the subtle body. And the meanings of these words are given. Anandamaya means bliss. Vijnanamaya, Vijnan stands for knowledge and wisdom. Manomaya stands for man, means mind, and Pranamaya means vital force and life force. Annamaya, Annam means food, because the physical body is sustained by food as well. With this, I conclude my presentation. This slide is only a list of references for anyone who is interested in learning more about these topics. There are many, many books to be read and understood to get to a certain level of understanding of the multidimensional view of the human body as expressed by the ancient scientists of India.